go ahead and get started. So, well, thanks for attending the presentation here. We're cutting through the hype. We're going to be talking about deploying generative AI safely and securely. And one of the things I want to mention is that in a 30-minute presentation, actually less, leaving room for Q&A, we don't have a lot of time to go into a lot of details. So I'm going to be trying to cover some of the most practical use cases on how to deploy AI or generative AI specifically in an environment so that it's actually usable. Oh, trying to figure out how to advance my screen. There we go. All right. I'm not really going to talk too much about me. Number one, half of you probably or more don't really care so much about me so much as you want to hear the information, but there's a little bit about me. If you want to know more, just I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. So one of the first questions or one of the first responses I get when we're talking about generative AI and ICS and OT manufacturing is the traditionalists and the operators are kind of like, "What? Are you crazy? No, that's not what we do. We don't put new things in our environments." But because generative AI is becoming so prolific, and because we are moving into an era much like what I would consider to be to the scale and caliber of the phone, the cell phone, the internet, right? I mean, this is kind of the way of the future, and it's going to be one of those things to where it's going to be very advantageous. But like adopting all technologies, especially when it comes to ICS and OT in industrial networks, anything new poses its own share of risks. And so there are some organizations starting to adopt it and figure out, hey, how can we do this? How can we do this in a safe manner? Because there are a lot of benefits to be gained. And so let's first take a look at, where is generative AI specifically? Because we're talking about this presentation is primarily focused on generative AI, but there are aspects of machine learning and other areas of AI that are and have been used quite for quite some time. But those were typically reserved for data scientists and people who really know the AI space to put that in the back end, and it was really nebulous. But now with generative AI, it's become more democratized and it's become more accessible, or at least people are starting to see that this is usable. Hey, I can do this, we can do this, an organization. And so there are some use cases where people are actually already using this. And so we're starting to see and let's talk going beyond just the chatbot. I did a presentation at S4 where I talked about vendors and the hype and what people are doing, and a lot of the things that people are putting out there in marketing and organizations are putting it out there just so that we can say that we're using AI and capture the buzzwords. And but there are several organizations that are not just a chatbot that just gives you general information, but are actually using it for real useful purposes and use cases. And we're still seeing that in areas of like governance, risk compliance, GRC, where people are using it to help create IR plans and security policies or to evaluate what they have or create those documents and evaluate. It's really starting to be used in risk analysis and threat monitoring, where there's one company out there that I literally just talked to. I'm at B-Sides New Orleans today, and one of the companies I talked to, D3, they've got a really cool solution that is really using generative AI and other AI machine learning, but using generative AI to help the SOC analysts, like level one, level two SOC, and to help make SOC analysis or the threat analysis in a SOC more efficient. And so these are really good use cases that are being used, analyzing network documents, those kind of things. Red teaming is starting to see some generative AI usage in there, but um, in being able to automate red team tests, I know there's some projects out there with MITRE, some AI using Caldera to automatically spin up Caldera agents and things like that. So you're starting to see some pen testing, red teaming being automated. And then, but right now, one of the best use cases is in cybersecurity training, just because training doesn't have to use real and sensitive data. And so, like, you can use it to create tabletop exercise scenarios. You can use it to create training scenarios, and you can use it to just as a whole list of training. And that's really kind of a safe use case, is using it in training. But the things that generative AI is really good at. So first and foremost, in one of the most prominent use cases is writing scripts and code. So when I say scripts, writing like Python scripts and things like that. It's really good at writing code, and it's really good at summarizing documents, writing draft documents. And I say draft documents because, as we'll get into, one of the things that you want to be aware of is the what's called hallucinations, and using not creating information that's not very accurate, or putting your sensitive data out there to create those documents. Like we said before, generating threat scenarios, IR triage, incident response triage, like I just mentioned, the kind of general cybersecurity guidance. But it's also really good at data analysis and correlation. So, just kind of going over there is analyzing contextual relationships and building graph database. So these are getting in more advanced use cases. But if you look at the last bullet there, it's pretty much good at automating and enhancing tasks that are otherwise normally human tasks, or tasks that take a human a really long time to do. And so I kind of the context that I put generative AI in is that generative AI really kind of helps augment the human tasks, right? So you have machine learning that do the back end pattern matching and correlation, and the really advanced stuff that requires neural networks. And then generative AI, large language models, have you use neural networks to create the large language models, and then those large language models really help automate and enhance, or make human tasks more efficient. And so some of the current risks to look out for, obviously, private and sensitive data exposure, putting up, your data, like if people are out there putting stuff on ChatGPT and getting answers, that there's a potential that data can stay out there, even if you're telling it not to save your data and you're in private mode. There's always that risk of exposing sensitive information and being, remain in that LLM or being used for training. Like we said before, relying on it for information that can be inaccurate, things like that. And then over reliance. And so right now there's a big trend of what's called vibe coding. So where people are creating applications, people that aren't programmers or software engineers that are creating applications and just letting it write all the code. And they don't really understand the code, don't understand what's going on, or if these AI technologies get implemented into your organization and people start relying on that, then you're losing that human element brain trust, right? If you lose the human in the loop and you rely on AI too much, then that is a gateway to all these other issues of, you don't know what's going in there. You don't know if private information, sensitive information, or inaccurate information. And then of course, when it comes to OT, you always have the concern of uh, disrupting operational processes and that sort of thing. But I really don't see, you really shouldn't be using large language models and generative AI. You really shouldn't be using this stuff in production environments anyway. And so while you can use it for OT related tasks, and use it for knowledge, and you can use it for OT, this isn't something that you want to put in the production environment anyway. So as long as you as long as you, sorry, I was looking at I just noticed that there was a question here. Um, and I'll have to get back to that one later. But obviously, mistakes can happen, but you shouldn't be using AI, or this sort of generative AI thing on the production floor or in OT environments, production environments. And so some of the threats that you want to look out for are um, things like prompt injection, where if you do have some sort of proprietary application or something that you've built on generative AI, then there are if someone has access to that, there are certain prompting techniques to where they can extract data from that, your system prompt and other data. So if you're putting sensitive data or documents into the back end of your system to give the large language model information, then if you're not protecting against prompt engineering, then there are certain methods that data can be extracted. I don't worry too much about data and model poisoning for reasons that we'll talk about moving forward, but data and model poisoning is where the someone you get an open source model and someone has either corrupted that, or in the building process of that model someone has corrupted the data that goes into it, provided it with false information and that sort of thing. Then obviously misinformation, this is kind of an ancillary. This isn't a direct threat. This is more ancillary in terms of somebody can use large language models to create very realistic phone calls, videos, emails, and that sort of thing. But it's that is more of a side channel attack as opposed to directly using the model or the data or the prompts to get information. And then what we're starting to see is that as the the methodologies and the techniques get more advanced, we're going to start seeing more automated threats, going back into that red teaming, but for malicious purposes. So, and then there are a lot more of those threats. I mean, there, if you look at the OWASP, top 10 LLM threats, though there's a lot of them there, but these are the most prominent ones. And so when it comes to deploying generative AI, you want to deploy generative AI in your organization. I have these kind of like 5 steps that you want to think about and look at. And the first is using open source models. So while you can use things like ChatGPT and stuff like that with particular guidelines, and policy and governance is a big important thing when it comes to deploying AI in your organization, but I'm not going to get into policy and governance in this talk. I'm talking about more practical application and deployment here. But if you want to have a really secure and private generative AI system, you're going to need to look into using local models only, on-prem or private deployments of models that aren't using a public frontier model or a commercial model like OpenAI, ChatGPT, Anthropic, Claude, Google Gemini, and these sort of things. You want to use open source models, and there's Hugging Face is typically one of the places where you can go and find models. There's a whole other discussion and instruction set on how do you find models, and how do you know what to use? And the first place to start is Hugging Face. So you can start to look for local models. They're open source. You do have to be careful. You want to make sure you get them from reputable sources and that they haven't been tainted, and and they're safe. But you can use these models locally, provided you have enough hardware to avoid putting your data out there publicly. And we'll get into some more techniques on how to do that here in a minute. Um, So you can also use a program. So this is just where you get the models here in Hugging Face. And then you can also use tools to use those models. And so the easiest way to do it is simply using LM Studio, to where there's a tool called LM Studio. It's that link there. And you can install it on your machine, and it will automatically, you can search for models, you can find models, you can use them, you can test them locally. It even tells you, if you look on the right side there, it even tells you if that model will work on your computer. And there's a whole other category called quantization, which we're not going to get into. But basically, they distill the model down to work on lower hardware. So it's an effective way to use models. Now, is the quality always going to be the same? No, but there are things you can do to get around that. You can also use LM Studio to spin up a server that you can connect to it with code. So if you're writing scripts, you're doing actually development, then you can use it as your own API server, serving out those local models. And then it also, I think I might have accidentally missed something. So yeah, so it actually has its own chat screen as well. But I don't have that slide in here. But I mean, it's a full functional, full service. It'll do document analysis and all that. And so something to look at and play around with because it can be completely local. On a more production scale or more enterprise kind of quality, you have something called Open Web UI. Open Web UI is a tool that mimics ChatGPT, but it's got administrative functions. It'll use local models. You can have it use public models, and it has administrative functions that can let you put in guardrails and rules and restrictions and manage user accounts. And so this is kind of one of my go-to things when I'm deploying OpenAI, OpenAI, when I'm deploying generative AI for a customer that wants to have more of that ChatGPT feel and that production type of quality, that enterprise class application of it, but you can still keep everything local. Oh, I just had it out of order. There's the chat thing, the chat screen for LM Studio. So if you're talking about developing apps, actually developing the apps, then you're going to get into things like Olama, which is a tool that you would use to run in a command line. So if like you're developing apps, Olama is usually what you use to serve out those local LLMs. You'd also want to verify the models, and one way you can do that, there are several tools out there that let you look and see exactly what the input and the output is. You can look and see exactly what the prompt is, how it's analyzing it. And so there's several tools out there like weights and biases, Langsmith, Luminova, that they're kind of like it's a proxy, and all of your models prompts and output go through it so you can analyze everything and actually kind of see what it's doing and know that the information is proper and safe and all that. So I think this is a look at weights and biases, I think, or maybe Langsmith. So anyway, it's just a quick look at kind of how it analyzes everything and it gives you full visibility into everything so you know whether it's accurate or acting like it's supposed to. All right, and so the next thing is fine tuning. Really long story short, fine tuning is you take an existing um, model and you refactor it or refine it to be more accurate. And so whenever we actually do fine tuning techniques, you can increase the quality on a particular subject to be that of a more frontier commercial model. And so using fine tuning, you can fine tune out inaccuracies, you can fine tune something to whenever there's knowledge gaps. So fine tuning is a step that you would want to do with a local model to make it more fit for purpose and make it more accurate and to increase the power and the accuracy of these smaller models. And so it's literally just a set of question and answers. And we're not really, we don't have time to get into it, but a fine tuning a model, like you can do fine tuning with a space. There's a space in Hugging Face where you can fine tune those models. And it's literally just a set of questions and appropriate answers, proper answers. Um, then you have retrieval augmented generation. There's another way to make sure that your models are getting accurate information is you are simply feeding it text documents, feeding it knowledge-based documents, and then it does what's called a text embedding or vectorized embeddings to where it's taken all those documents and it's putting it into a format, for lack of a better phrase, it's putting into a format that the large language models can use more efficiently. And so the large language model will then reference that documents, all those documents that you've given it as a knowledge base so that you can help ensure more accurate data. But it also, that's the technique used if you want to have it analyze your documents or, so that's just another way to achieve accuracy, etc. Agentic applications are another thing that is kind of a buzzword nowadays, or using AI agents to achieve tasks. But there's a few specific things you want to look at. So first of all, um, agents, using a bunch of different agents expands the capabilities. So uh, as opposed to using a large, or like ChatGPT or a large language model in a single prompt to answer all your questions, use multiple agents for different purposes. So they're programs or functions that communicate and coordinate amongst themselves, and they're all fit for purpose. So they may have, one may be an internet search bot, one may be a verification agent, one may be a cybersecurity agent. So they all have their own special purposes and they all coordinate, and they can do tool calling and things like that, meaning, they can use tools like I can read a Word document, or this agent can go to the internet. And so, two important agents that you want to use when you're using agent system, the two most important, really, because you have all these agents that do these things, but the two most important is a guardrail agent. And so, a guardrail agent analyzes prompts coming in to make sure that they're appropriate, make sure that they're not doing anything they're not supposed to against company policy. Um, and it also analyzes context coming out from the LLM to make sure that it aligns with your policies, make sure it's accurate, make sure it's well, doing what it's supposed to be doing. And then you have reflective agents. Reflective agents are simply data verification. And so they will look at the information from the LLM and say, is this accurate? And they have many different ways that they can look at and to verify accuracy. So this helps eliminate hallucinations. So they can sit there and say, is this accurate? Is this safe? Is it putting something it shouldn't be? And if not, it sends it back to the agent, the original agent, and says, hey, you need to redo this. And so that's one, those guardrails and reflective agents, and using an agent system along with an open source model. That's the primary way to use generative AI for production environments that is safe and secure, and to minimize hallucinations. Um, this is a really cool tool. So it's called N8N. And this lets anyone from beginner level to advanced programmers build your own agentic systems. Don't have time for a demo or anything like that. This is just it. I have no affiliation with this tool, but I use this to help create my agents. You can create them in a visual node-based system like this. You can even go back to code anytime. So at any point you say, well, I want to work with the code, then you can actually go back to the code. And yes, it is completely, you can host it local. There is a cloud service, but this is completely open source and locally hosted. So check this out if you want to create agentic systems. And then finally are guardrails. And really this is kind of goes back to the guardrail agent, right? So if you're using an agentic system and you're using agents, then you're going to have a guardrail agent, and kind of talked already about, like, what uh the guardrails are. And so um kind of the integration tips, the high level and final integration tips, is you really want to understand the limitations and the privacy security aspects of each method, everything you're doing here, but also the models. You want to understand the difference between local and public, and where your data is going, and how to protect that data using local open source or guardrails or whatnot. And you want to remember that LLMs should enhance your tasks and workflows and not replace it. So you always want to keep the human in the loop. You want to make sure that you're not relying on them too much. You want to make sure that you're not having it do your job for you or somebody's job for you, that it makes mistakes. You're always going to need human verification. And even as they get better for quite some time to come, you're still going to need the human in the loop, and you're still going to need verification, especially when it comes to security. When it comes to creative tasks, that may be eliminated soon, and the need to have a human verification. But when it comes to production data, and actually production use in the enterprise and in operations, you're going to need a human in the loop for some time, but it can still augment human tasks. You can still extract value, and it can still be, um, it can still be useful and provide a lot of production value and efficiency. Um, So real quick, just like before, when you are deploying, these are the three number one questions to ask for production, and make sure that you're doing it safely and securely. Don't use generative AI just to use generative AI. Ask yourself, is it really necessary? Is it really giving me any value to achieve my task? Um, you know, is and I guess, is it necessary? Is it adding any value? And what risk does it pose? Every time you deploy generative AI, those are the questions you ask before you even start. Don't do generative AI just to use generative AI. All right. So my time is almost up, and I have some time left for Q&A. I'm going to see if I can get to that. We do have Q&A. Okay. So what security controls are holding AI back from enhancing value in manufacturing? In other words, where do things stand at pulling plant floor control data to train AI and ML? models that can improve efficiency. So yeah, that's really kind of being done right now. It's really starting to be done. And the only limitations are the fact that obviously, operators don't want to expose their data and they don't want their data being sent out to public models and all that. But if you have, there's nothing to stop training a model or fine-tuning a model on your data as long as you have the hardware and a local model to do it and you know where your data is going, you're not sending it out there. So I think really it's just the biggest limitations are number one is the quality of local open source models. They're not quite there yet, like the frontier models are, but also the expertise. I mean, this is such a new technology or a new derivative of an AI technology. There's not a lot of people that know how to do this yet, too. So it's about hardware, the quality of the models, hardware to actually do the training, and the skills provide or the skill set you need to be able to provide that the training. Um, what AI models would you suggest that would be great for code audit, open source or not? Open source or not? Okay, if you're not talking about open source, right now the best on the market is Gemini 2.5 Pro and Claude Sonnet 3.7 is a close second. Those are the leading coding markets. And so open source, if you don't mind using a model from Alibaba, I think Quinn 2.5 Coder, the the Quinn models are really good at writing code and evaluating code. Pretty much any model that's good at coding is going to be good at evaluating code. We have okay, so we had what if you fully vibe code the whole code base and then manually edit yourself? Not a good idea. I write code every single day, hours a day, and I use AI to help me. I use it as a code assistant. I don't do vibe coding because what ends up happening um, with vibe coding, you have what's called the death spiral. And what'll happen if it codes everything, first of all, if you try to manually audit yourself, if you haven't been, if it's especially if it's a big application, you don't know that code base. You don't know, it's very difficult to audit and debug and refactor code that you don't have any idea what it is. And even vibe coding, even the best code models, they don't do a really good job by themselves, left to their own devices to write that code. So you need to use it. Vibe coding is not a good idea. It's fun, but you're not going to get any real production apps out of vibe coding. The use cases you shared at the beginning, Red Team, Cyber, are cyber focused. What are the highest value AI use cases for asset owners and manufacturing only as production? So, yeah, I use cyber. Anytime that you can have a bunch of data and a bunch of data points and correlative relationships in those data points, you can analyze efficiencies, you can analyze um, anomalies and things like that. Really, traditional machine learning is going to be better for efficiency gains and things like that. But if you have all of your data like in a graph database and have those relationships, um, AI can create the relationships and help you analyze the relationships. So any type of risk analysis, any type of efficiency gain, those kind of things is what generative AI is good for, not just cyber. And are multimodality, sound, image, et cetera, being used in training AI models for cyber? Um, I don't know that answer. I know that there are multimodal models. I don't know that any of them are specifically being trained multimodally for cyber. I don't know that yet. That's a good question. That's something I need to look into. I think I got everybody's questions. I hope I answered them.
Looks like it. Yeah, no, lots of good questions and a great talk as always. Since we have a few minutes, so where do you see AI going in the next
But what time is
year
my
or
talk in?
two?
I thought it ended at the top of the hour.
We actually have till 5 after.
Oh, well, I did a good job. Look at that. Okay. Anyway, all right. So what was your question then?
So, what are some of the big changes you think or see coming with AI or machine learning over the next year or two?
I think that the models are going to continue to get better. And I think as you're starting to see new techniques emerge to where you don't necessarily have to have all the data trained in specifically domain specific right off the bat, and you don't even really need to fine tune. I think models are getting better at long-term memory with RAG techniques like retrieval augmented generation techniques, and using large knowledge bases of after the fact of data. The efficiencies that models are gaining using retrieval augmented generation and multi-agent or agentic systems is starting to get better than having custom models or fine tuning the models. And so I think that over time, models are going to get this is the most key part. Um, as models context window requirements get smaller, or as they're able to handle larger context windows, you're going to start all these limitations, um, like inaccurate stuff and it kind of losing its way and getting lost. If you've ever experienced long context with like ChatGPT or whatever, when the conversation gets long, it starts to get confused or it starts to like come up with things or forget things, right? So I think as that efficiency gets better and context window usage gets more accurate, more efficient, um, you're going to start to see the limitations in general go away. For example, you're not going to see the hallucinations. You're not going to see the inaccuracies. And I think the best answer is when that starts to happen, what isn't it going to do, right? I mean, what can't we do at that point? If you can have an entire human history of knowledge be referenced in a split second, it's pretty scary what you can come up with, good and bad.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's I guess the trick. The good and the bad.
Um, so I so I said vibe code today and can be fixed tomorrow by AI. You know, I let me. Oh, here's a good point. Generative AI is exponentially better at reviewing existing work and finding discrepancies and or fixing existing work than it is from coming up with completely accurate work from scratch. So what that means is when you use those um, when you use those verification agents, it improves accuracy exponentially because it's better. So it's better at checking itself than it is at creating something accurately in the first place. So that comment right there about, use AI vibe code today and then have AI fix it later. I haven't thought about that and haven't tried that. And I'm kicking myself for not thinking of that. But that that could actually work. Have AI vibe code the entire thing and then have another AI come back and fix everything. I see an interesting project.
You have lots of interesting projects.
I am an interesting project. That's what my wife says.
That too. Well, thank you again, Clint. I appreciate it. And I know everybody did as well. So another
Yep.
great
All right.
session.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. See you next week.